When I first got into the local Republican Party apparatus in Brooklyn, New York, my first day in, I was appointed a vice chairman of the law committee. My guy won by 12 votes. It was that close, out of 50,000 votes. The access to information probably makes people a little more anxious because they're seeing things that they didn't see before, especially localized information. There is no speedy trial law, for example, in the U.S. Virgin Islands. That's something we seem to take for granted in every other jurisdiction in the mainland United States and basically within the United States as a whole.
Civil cases, because of that timeline, my particular case has been going on for almost 7 years, 201 court dockets, not a single hearing to address any of them. Can you imagine that? You get a demand letter from the court and they don't answer it. And then they pended that grievance upon the civil case for this person. For victims, you have to find someone from the Virgin Islands to represent you in the Virgin Islands. Any mainstream attorneys, mainline, don't want to touch it. It's too far away. It's too expensive. Variety of issues.
Mm-hmm.
So the victims are really left without recourse. When you have a civil case that's nearly 30 years old, people can die before it's ever even brought to court.
Federal court is very much a creature of schedule and deadlines. So definitely use the federal resources down there. The DOJ is not answerable to any local authority, and their budget comes from Washington. So they can step in and they can investigate externally to see exactly what's going on. It worked for the British Virgin Islands. It should work for the U.S. Virgin Islands as well.
Criminal trials are taking 12 years on average to come to get in front of the judge, according to the FBI.
The good thing that could come from the whole Jeffrey Epstein saga is that New York is another jurisdiction you can look to for at least a civil recompense against Jeffrey Epstein and his estate. When you get a society, like you said, a snake den like that, that is suitable for those conditions for the snakes to thrive, do you really expect the snakes to be able to say, that's it for us, we should straighten out and fly right? That doesn't happen. Every election cycle, we're duped into believing that these people are going to be different than the last crop of buffoons that we had in office.
I feel like we almost need a mental health test before someone actually can run. The discourse that we've been seeing growing up, I always had this, whether true or false, this impression that the president was very dignified. He could talk eloquently, able to go to different countries and represent ours in a way that I felt was honorable, put a good light on who America or Americans are. That's changed a lot, especially in the last years.
It's awareness of the population is the key to know that when they're being BS'd by someone. The scandals of the rich and famous have always been there. The uncivil nature of politics has always been there. Thomas Jefferson even once complained about the press and how he wished that he could lock up journalists. The culture war in America is just as important as any election in America. And the more we push back on divisive culture, the better off we're all going to be in growing this unified culture for the nation as a whole. I was amazed at the response from people just talking about common sense. Yeah, this is dumb. This is stupid. This is why I think it's stupid. Look for those toxic traits about their personality. Do they have a lack of self-awareness about an issue? I care more about the message getting out than I do about any sort of money from this book. So Schnooks, Crooks, Lies, and Scoundrels, check it out today.
Grab life by the horns and keep inspiring others.
When I first got into the local Republican Party apparatus in Brooklyn, New York, my first day in, I was appointed a vice chairman of the law committee. That's how desperate they were for people to be involved. There's nothing new under the sun happening today in politics that hasn't been going on in some form or another since the inception of this country. There is no speedy trial law, for example, in the U.S. Virgin Islands. The Epstein situation seems to be quite unique in that everybody, and by everybody, the U.S. Virgin Islands and the federal criminal justice system and even, private institutions like J.P. Morgan Chase are all seemingly pointing the fingers at each other. To me, the story of the U.S. Virgin Islands is about a closed insular population where everyone seems to know everybody else, especially those in power, And there's very little oversight done by DOJ or anyone within the federal government that seem to be leaving the U.S. Virgin Islands to their own devices.
Civil cases, because of that timeline, my particular case has been going on for almost 7 years, 201 court dockets, not a single hearing to address any of them. For victims, you have to find someone from the Virgin Islands to represent you in the Virgin Islands. Any mainstream attorneys, mainline, don't want to touch it. It's too far away. It's too expensive. Variety of issues.
Mm-hmm.
So the victims are really left without recourse. When you have a civil case that's nearly 30 years old, people can die before it's ever even brought to court.
Federal court is very much a creature of schedule and deadlines. So definitely use the federal resources down there.
They want the appearance like they're doing their job, but when you actually dig into things like you have, then you see how grossly negligent it actually is. Criminal trials are taking 12 years on average to come to get in front of the judge, according to the FBI.
There have been calls for additional funding for the judiciary in the Virgin Islands. I think that the head of the judiciary has asked for the appointment of 2 additional judges and additional staff, and they wanted an increase in budget. Everybody's acting in their own self-interest, and they sort of act collectively together going in that same direction without any sort of coordination between them. Every election cycle, we're sort of duped into believing that these people are going to be different than the last crop of buffoons that we had in office.
I feel like we almost need a mental health test before someone actually can run. The discourse that we've been seeing, across the aisle.
Honestly, I think it all got really bad when we started giving journalists bylines. When journalists started getting credit for their work in newspapers. It's that sort of punditry and prognostication of politics that has really blurred the line between news and feature and opinion and all that. And people are buying it hook and line and sinker because they go for what they believe in themselves. Awareness of the population is the key to know that when they're being BS'd by someone. The scandals of the rich and famous have always been there. The incivility, the uncivil nature of politics has always been there. Really vet all these candidates. Look for those toxic traits about their personality. Do they have a lack of self-awareness about an issue?